Hey, Grandma. Why don't you tell me some of those stories you were telling me last Christmas?
What?
Tell me some of those stories you were telling me last Christmas about growing up in New York City and coming from Germany and the boat over and everything.
Well, my father in Germany, he was always friendly. He's a very loving man, very loving. And when he was a youngster, to learn a trade, you had to travel. So he went through part of France. And of course he loved the ladies there. And he picked up some French. And he loved them. He loved people. And when the Kaiser people were for the war, he didn't want war. He never wanted to fight anybody. But he had to go when he was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have to tell you, he used to serenade my mother. He sang beautiful, high tenor, and my mother said she was embarrassed when he came. He learned the trade, very fancy iron work. So she worked for very wealthy people, and they had a big estate. And whenever they had to move their paintings, they would call on the men from the shop. And there were two men there that always went out, and he always made sure that they called him. So I guess he fell in love with her. And the minute he opened the gate to go up through the estate, he started singing. And everybody stopped working. Everybody. And the lady at the house wanted to know, who? And my mother was hiding. So but he sang. Mom said if he in America, he would have been on stage already in opera. Mm-hmm. He was so good. Well, anyway, he was a very fine iron worker. So, but he had to go to war, and he got wounded, and at that time they called it shell shock,
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't want any part. In fact, he didn't want to fight. He said, but when he said when somebody points a rifle in front of you, you got it.
Mm-hmm.
You have no choice to shoot. But he even during his period in the war, he said there were cruel things happening, and terrible things too. But he helped. One Frenchman was wounded. He didn't want to come in to be taken care of. And so my father crawled over to him and spoke French to him. Mm-hmm. And they conversed about, he showed pictures of his children, and the Frenchman showed pictures of his children. And then finally he was convinced to go with Pop, and he took him to the first aid.
Yeah.
So take care of him. But after the war, it was bad. Already, I think Hitler was working already underground, and he was working with the laborers. That's how he started.
Yeah.
There was hardly any work,
Yeah.
My father took over his father's coal business, so he had a little shop, and after they were married, they took over this coal business and our home in Germany was right along the Main River, right up the back street was right there, because years ago his grandfather was very busy. He also was a ship. He used to bring the coal in on the boats, mm-hmm. and then they dropped it off, and they went, and opposite the family home, they had a big, like a garage where they had the little pony and the wagons and the coal.
Mm-hmm.
And they said when they got married, just before the war, like they tried to rework on the business because it was kind of dead for years, and the only customers, the first customers they had was Jewish people, a temple, and they said, "Oh, we have, but yeah, we'll take them." They were their first customer, and my mother was very outspoken, and I know, and my father, so their first customers were Jewish people. And I'm sure if they had stayed in Germany, they would have been killed, because my mother would have stuck out for their friends.
What was the why did they decide to leave Germany?
It's near Frankfurt.
Yeah, why did they decide to leave?
Why
did they decide to leave Germany?
He didn't want any part of Germany anymore.
Yeah.
And it wasn't good anymore. They still had work, but my mother was always, but they had union meetings where he had to go, and my mother was afraid to even let him go, so he didn't even go there. But it already was, I think Hitler was already infiltrating.
Yeah.
And he wanted to leave. So he got a letter he wanted to come to America, but you had to know somebody. Years ago, there were, I think, 2 or 3 young cousins of his who left Germany, but he never got in touch with them. They wandered off. One North America, South America, they left, and but so they couldn't get a visa for here. So he received a letter from a classmate of his, and saying how from Brazil, saying how good it was and everything. Oh, come to Brazil, and you'll be fine. Everything's fine. So everything, dropped everything, and Mom's, and even the old family home. He was just you couldn't buy things. It was inflation time.
Yeah.
And the paper money was worth nothing.
Yeah.
Mom said he was going to give everything. He gave all my the family home had it was like a store, 2-family home, and he had the tenant had 2 young girls, and he lived there. He was a clerk in some bank or something, and he said it was a good thing he told my father not to sell the house, because he would have had nothing, and he wouldn't listen to Mom. Those days, the old days, women had nothing to say. It was the man who had. You had to follow the man, and she did everything. He gave all my dolls and my carriages and to the family with the girls. Gave it away. I didn't have one doll. Mom said, "Let her have one." Oh, we got it in Brazil. We got it in Brazil. I didn't get a doll for years. He made a wooden doll for me. Anyway, the money that they got they had a little wagon, a pony for me, for the children, a pony with a wagon, and for that much money that they got for that thing, she felt sick when they got to Hamburg to take out get the boat for Brazil. She was so sick over everything, because everything was just poured away, The business was just left away to somebody else, for hardly nothing. And so she went to the tavern to get a little whiskey for her stomach. The little whiskey that she had to pay for was as much as she got for that little pony in the wagon.
Wow.
Can you imagine? the money was worth nothing. So they came to Brazil. It was in Rio de Janeiro, or I guess they went down. They had to go down to Santos, more or less. I don't know. Anyway, they got there, and his friend had a tavern, and of course my mother didn't like it. You know, they were just there drinking, and she couldn't stay. While they were there, a man was there who apparently had property and couldn't keep it. So the government took his property over, but he told my mother about the property that he had, and it was a virgin piece of land, and nobody ever lived on it yet, you know. It was in the wilderness. It was down in, past Santos, inland. From Santos. So anyway, my mother was she wanted to get rid of this city life. She didn't like that, and the tavern and all that. So when he told her about this, and she was brought up on a farm. She was they had a family of 12, and her father was a grape grower on a hill, and also a farmer, you know. But years ago, the city lived in enclosed, you know, and your farming land was outside of the city. So when my mother always told me about the country and so on, her farming at home, I always thought that I had a big farm out on the up high. Years later, when I went to Germany with Lynn, the family home was in the middle of this town. A big cement house, big old house, must have been about a good couple of 100 years old. But it was right in town, the center of town. The woman, now I'm skipping things, but when we got to that house, we looked it up, Lynn and I. It was owned by a woman who used to be married to one of my mother's brothers, one of her brother. And they got divorced or something. Anyway, I never met him, but he gave the house to the wife. So she made 7 apartments out of it. So you can imagine how big.
Yeah.
Because they had the upstairs where the family lived upstairs, and then below the ground was for the animals. That's how they lived years ago. The animals lived in the same house.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of a family home where you can see outside the crank for lifting the things. Yeah. And so anyway, I was shocked when I saw that. I was picturing it on a hill because she loved when they got to Brazil. Finally, they had to go to Santos, and from Santos they had to take a train, a boat, or a wagon before they got to the property. And when they had to go first to the government. The man who had the property gave that paper to my family, and they had to take it to the government to let them know that they won it. So the government was so happy to see them, because he said the German people are hard workers. They work hard. And where the land was a German community, like. We had like, our neighbors were far apart. We had, I remember, they must have been like from here to the next town, like, you know, like from where we lived in Ardsley to the city, you know, to the town, and where we lived up on the hill, to get one neighbor, and we just like one neighbor out on one side was right up behind the last home, and then we had this land. It was virgin. Nobody ever lived on it, and so the neighbors, of course, when they saw my mother and she had like one trunk or something, she couldn't take much with her because Pop wouldn't let it, you know. So, but whatever they wanted, they bargained for something. And she wanted, I was only a little one, I must have been about 2.5 or 3. We left, I was born in 1919, and they left Germany in 1923, I think.
No, 21. They got here in 23.
Huh?
When did you get here?
Here? In 1928,
Okay.
in America.
Okay.
And we lived in Brazil 5 years.
Okay.
I was 10, so I must have been about 4 then or something, or close to it. I don't know, but I was still little. My mother needed milk for me. So she tried to get a cow. So my father had an old top hat, you know, that you push the button, it pops up. And he got a cow for it. And they expected the cow to give milk, and it was a dry cow. She wasn't ready to give milk yet. So they got so cheated there and everything. But that's how they traded things. Whatever my mother had in the trunk, they all wanted it, so they would give them something. And the neighbors helped my father chop the trees down. So made some clearing to the main road. Always was big enough for the neighbors, and it was a town government road that had to be cleaned. But then to live up, my mother wanted to live up on the hill. They had to break through, and the trees that they had to cut, he had to get help. The neighbors helped him. So the first house I remember we were in a log cabin. He built a log cabin, and of course we had rain coming through it all the time because he didn't know how to really build anything. The neighbors helped you to some amount, and then you're on your own. So that was my first thing. When I remember the winter months were very cold, and we had rain and thunder and rain, and I remember rain coming through and feeling cold, but we lived through that. And then my mother used to take my big brother. He was like 7 years older than I. My other brother was like 3 years older than I, Bill. And Bill would see every snake. I never saw really a snake, but he would walk around and find it. And so he was always working with my father, and my father was always clearing the road. He had to get space for they got a cow and another cow, and then they had a pig later on. And so he was always clearing the field, cutting trees down and clearing away. And my brother Bill always went with him. Mm-hmm. My big brother always worked with my mother. They got up when the sun came out early in the morning. You get up and then you go to bed early. And she went out hoeing, planting. That's what he and she did mostly.
What would they plant?
So.
What sort of plants were they planting?
Oh, corn and ivy. Ivy was it was a rooted plant. You find it in the markets here. One of these days I have to get that. It looks like the root of a tree, and it's called ivy. And that was like you washed it and you boiled it, and then you cut it in thing, and then you take it out, and it's like potatoes. It's mealy.
I'm gonna,